Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
My guest today is Beth Shirley. Beth is a registered pharmacist and a certified clinical nutritionist who has developed a unique expertise as both a pharmacist and a certified clinical nutritionist. She's had a very distinguished 40-plus year career. She's been a pioneer at the cutting edge of the evolution of what has now come to be known as integrative pharmacy, the junction between traditional pharmacy and the use of clinical nutritional supplementation. Since 2009, Beth has worked in close collaboration with some of the world's leading thought leaders in the field of nitric oxide research. Through this, she has developed an in-depth knowledge on the topic and its potential beneficial applications in multiple aspects of patient care. In addition, she has worked closely with the scientific community and cutting-edge companies working on innovative nutritional ingredients and approaches to their use for a variety of life's metabolic challenges. I think you'll find this conversation I have with Beth Shirley extremely informative, and it will, I think, straighten out some of the confusion there is with the co-administration of methylene blue and nitric oxide. So enjoy this great conversation. All right, I'm back again with Beth Shirley, who I did a great episode on nitric oxide a while back, and this time we're going to catch up on kind of a close subject, but basically methylene blue and how nitric oxide interacts with methylene blue. Beth, thanks for coming back. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So
have some fun.
Yeah. So let's talk about methylene blue. Maybe we could call it the oldest drug of the approved FDA status of drugs. I don't know. What do you want to call it? Other than methylene blue.
Yeah. Well, we can call it the magic bullet.
Yeah, Paul Ehrlich, right?
That was coined.
Yeah.
Magic bullet, 1886.
Very cool. It was used as a dye, right? Before they started and I heard something that Levi, the jeans company, might have played with this a little bit.
Exactly. The blue jeans.
Yeah.
Huh?
What happened? Obviously, they were using it as a dye before they used it for a pharmacologic agent.
I'm not quite sure how they figured out that it was actually effective, but in 1891, it was the first drug used for malaria.
Well, maybe those guys down there, working in the malarial areas, were wearing their blue jeans and got malaria and ended up chewing the cloth and got the dye. Who knows, right? We can make up some wild story.
Some story, yeah.
But it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And as we talked before we started recording, it was probably the first drug approved by the FDA. For what that matters anymore, who knows? But it was grandfathered in because, like you said, it was used for malaria for a while and everything. But let's talk about it because there's been a lot of confusion, and I think you referenced a book that was recently published that has caused some confusion in patients that are taking both methylene blue and nitric oxide supplementation, and it would be great to solve this issue for them.
Yeah. So there's been a resurgence of the interest in the methylene blue these last couple years in this post-viral world we're living in, because methylene blue is actually the parent compound of chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, which we know has been effective.
Right. Contrary to a lot of narratives.
Exactly.
Right. But methylene blue is an electron donor, right?
It's both. It's electron donor and acceptor. So it's a
okay.
redox molecule.
Okay.
So
And
it's used as kind of an antidote to anything that displaces oxygen.
okay.
Okay. So
its first indication was for methemoglobinemia, right?
right. It's in every hospital for carbon monoxide, cyanide poisoning. However, this is where this post-viral world comes in, because the spike protein, it oxidizes your iron, your Fe2 plus in the hemoglobin that can carry oxygen. It oxidizes it to Fe3 plus, which can't carry oxygen.
So this ferric molecule
Right.
becomes gets another proton, goes from 2 to 3, and then when it does that, it just can't bind oxygen anymore.
It can't carry oxygen, right?
Okay, so it's kind of like a suffocation of the RBC.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The thing is nitric oxide can scavenge that Fe3 plus. However, then it takes that nitric oxide out of circulation to do all these other good things that we've talked about.
Right, right.
And so that's why you're seeing all these cardiovascular complications, you know, the clots, the strokes, and all these things.
And you think that's caused by just the reduction in the ability for the binding of oxygen? Or is there another mechanism?
Well, the nitric oxide is trying to bind up that excess Fe3 plus.
So it's just taken up. It can't do its other job.
Right.
Okay. All right. And how did it get to the concept of like using nattokinase or lumbrokinase, some of these, I guess we call them functional anticoagulants, to decrease the
clotting.
Clotting. Yeah.
Well, because nitric oxide governs platelet activation and aggregation.
Okay.
So then when you're nitric oxide deficient, you're going to clot up.
So let's say you're running along and you got an acceptable level, maybe not an optimal level. And clearly we see this in the younger folks that have been affected by this, but they're running at let's say they have a detectable level of nitric oxide. Spike protein gets in there, messes around with the hemoglobin molecule. Now the nitric oxide is distracted, and instead of taking care of its daily business like it's supposed to be doing, it has to take care of this other event. And then that creates other events because they're not able to take care of what they were originally designed to do.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. That gives me a much better understanding of it. Let's go back to methylene blue a little bit, because there's an obvious difference with many drugs, actually, between low dose and high dose.
Right.
Chat about that.
Right. You can't talk about methylene blue without talking about the dosage. So low dose methylene blue is that redox molecule. It's an electron cycler, shuffler. It can actually, donate electrons and accept electrons. However, as you increase the dose, these high doses can actually be pro-oxidant.
Okay.
And actually even cause that methemoglobinemia.
So what's high dose versus low dose? Give us a dosage spectrum.
Well, in the literature, they say anything more than 3 milligrams per kilogram is high dose. However, I caution way on the lower side of that. I really don't like people doing more than like 25 milligrams unless you're doing something specific and you're working with a practitioner. Maybe you have Lyme and you want to, go after that.
Right.
But just, as long as you're working with a practitioner and they're monitoring you. But always remember, like, if you're still peeing out any kind of blue or green pee,
right,
you've got enough methylene blue circulating.
So that's a great point, because how do we monitor these things that we're supplementing? And it's pretty easy to look down after you've urinated and go, wow, that looks like, some really good household cleanser because it's green and,
It's
I
pretty.
saw the same. I saw a bottle of that over at Costco just the other day. And then, and then it wanes as most things do, but it's a great way, because if you take like 25 milligrams and then next morning it's still green, you may not obviously take any more. And then, so you can kind of titrate it to how you're using it and excreting it. And,
Right.
it's maybe not as elegant as the litmus test or the testing strips for what we use in nitric oxide supplementation, but it's still a very valid way to look at it. And it's easy enough for a patient to perceive, oh yeah, my urine's still pretty green. I can go another day without taking it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I noticed. I noticed. I noticed that if I take a 25 milligram, I'm good for about 3 days. So.
Yeah, I'm good for 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All
But
right. Well,
it's gotten a resurgence, like in the biohacking community for cognition.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah. So let's talk about that, because there are some things written about the neuroprotective nature of methylene blue and traumatic brain injury and,
Right.
subsequent events and from stroke and these different types of things.
It enhances the brain mitochondrial function.
Okay.
So pardon?
Well, in one of the papers that you wrote, you talk about how INOS is 1,000 times, maybe I've got that wrong or backwards, but when one goes up, the other goes down, the INOS, ENOS. Can you explain that a little bit?
Right. INOS, that's your inducible NOS. This is the NOS that gets upregulated by infections, pathogens, bacterial, viral, fungal, parasitic. Also, a lot of these environmental factors, EMF, aluminum, mercury, gluten, glyphosate, high fructose corn syrup, all of these things that are environmental factors.
Right.
So INOS produces, this is like your eNOS and your nNOS. These make like bursts of nitric oxide on an as-needed basis. The INOS gets upregulated and it kind of just goes in the on phase.
Okay.
Because all of these inflammatory processes, they are constant. So it's stimulating this INOS to produce this nitric oxide. However, remember that all of these processes that I was talking about, these inflammatory processes, these infections, these increase oxidative stress.
Mm-hmm.
When you increase oxidative stress, you are uncoupling NOS.
Okay.
And when NOS is uncoupled, it becomes a superoxide generator, not a nitric oxide producer.
Okay.
So you're increasing oxidative stress. So, but also when you're upregulating INOS, you are downregulating eNOS and nNOS. So you are impairing your circulation and microcirculation. You are impairing your brain function.
I want to unpack that a little bit because there's a lot there. Okay. So when you have some type of a stressful pathogen, let's call it an infection, that causes an upregulation in INOS.
Right.
All right. And the purpose of
that's your immune, that's one of your first immune reactions to these pathogens.
Okay.
Is making the nitric oxide in order to go after these pathogens.
And then you said that after the INOS is upregulated, it affects detrimentally the eNOS.
And the nNOS. It downregulates your eNOS and nNOS.
Okay, so think about that a second from a peripheral neuropathic standpoint. If we have something causing neuroinflammation, some stressor, it's going to decrease the nNOS that I need inside that nerve.
Right.
Ideally. Now, how does methylene blue come into play with INOS and its subsequent effects with eNOS?
Well, methylene blue down-regulates an up-regulated INOS.
Okay, so it kind of moderates that uptick or upregulation of INOS from the stressor. And by suppressing that a little bit, then we're able to maybe produce more enos or not.
Well, when you're down-regulating, you're down-regulating INOS, and there's more of a chance that enos and nnos can function better.
Okay, all right.
However, just always remember, when that INOS is upregulated, it doesn't necessarily mean it's producing lots of nitric oxide, because all of those factors that upregulate it actually cause oxidative stress.
Okay.
So is the damage from an upregulated INOS, like this is, the $64 million question, is it really from the upregulated nitric oxide, or is it from the upregulated superoxide?
Good questions, right?
Right.
So let's go back now to this book that created some controversy or discussion. What was the thesis? I've not read the book. I'm not familiar with it other than what you just mentioned. So what was the thesis? That nitric oxide's bad and methylene blue is good? Is that what it was? Or
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty much what it was. Right. And that because the methylene blue downregulates the production of nitric oxide. So why would you support your nitric oxide if you're going to do the methylene blue?
Okay.
Okay.
But we know that there's, at low doses, some very synergistic effects, do we not?
Yes.
Why wasn't that talked about? Why wasn't that included in that thesis?
Well, because he's not a nitric oxide researcher.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
And there's some interesting things, like with methylene blue, it actually supports the function of nNOS, your neuronal NOS.
Right.
Okay, so this is, it will not affect your eNOS, doesn't detrimentally affect your nNOS. It actually supports the nNOS production, which is very important for your brain.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So you talk about in your white paper, which I'm going to put in the show notes, because I think this thing's beautiful from the standpoint that it's extremely well written. It's concise. It's understandable. I think actually this could be a paper that practitioners may want to hand to their patients, because I think he did such a great job of explaining it. And so you pointed out in there at low dosages, methylene blue is, effective in the electron transport chain, and it works on cytochrome C oxidase or complex 4. Okay. And ultimately what that does is actually increases the ability to consume more oxygen or produce more oxygen in the mitochondria.
So methylene blue, your mitochondria consume a lot of oxygen.
Okay.
And you take that oxygen and they end up making your ATP, and that oxygen gets further metabolized into water. However, not all of that oxygen gets metabolized into water. A lot of that gets metabolized into reactive oxygen species, like your superoxide.
Okay.
So the mitochondrial electron transport chain is a big source of these reactive oxygen species.
We need them, but not too much of them.
Not too much.
Right.
And so when you get too much of them, this interferes with the production of ATP.
ATP is pretty vital.
It is.
Yeah.
So what's kind of cool, like this methylene blue is an electron donor and acceptor. So it keeps things flowing down this electron transport chain.
Okay.
Instead of going off and making your superoxide, your reactive oxygen species.
Right. So what happens with high dose versus low dose in this same mechanism?
Well, then the high dose, it becomes a pro-oxidant. So it's more of, you're not donating and accepting.
You're just
Throwing
creating.
them on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put them up and creating more.
So in the hospital use for carbon monoxide poisoning, those are probably pretty high doses of methylene blue that they're giving, basically just to really eradicate the toxin or eradicate the effect of the toxin.
Right. It has to do with, hypoxic situations.
Okay.
Okay. And so this is where, like, that complex, the cytochrome C oxidase, the complex 4.
Mm-hmm. Are they the same thing, Beth? Are they?
They're close. They kind of stick on each other.
Right. Because isn't complex 4 where metformin plays around?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
But the beautiful thing about cytochrome C oxidase is it can morph into a nitrite reductase enzyme under hypoxic situations.
Wait. Say that again.
Cytochrome C oxidase can change into a nitrite reductase enzyme under hypoxic situations, which means that it can reduce nitrite to nitric oxide on an as-needed basis in order to open up the microcapillaries to keep the tissue and cells oxygenated.
So the hypoxic environment is basically a trigger. This is a way to upregulate the production of nitric oxide to overcome that hypoxic stress in the tissue sample or whatever you're focusing on.
Right.
Yeah. And I think empirically you can think about almost any type of musculoskeletal pathology, or they're all even wound pathology. It's always in a hypoxic environment. It's never like, oh, there's just so much blood here that it's going to take care of everything. The pathology has created these hypoxic environments. So this is the body's way to respond to them.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, because all of these environmental factors actually create the hypoxic environment.
And now a message from our sponsor. Well, folks, if you're over 40 and you're not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really rethink that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention the cardio protection. Nitric oxide is a physiological molecule that does so many things for your health. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, just go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pod of Inquiry. Use Pod of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I am certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but for all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see that nearly every one of them will be deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them on it immediately. Now, thanks to Approved Medical Solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates. Thanks for watching. You can start today. Let's what you talk about methylene blue and the chronic inflammatory pathway, and you mentioned all these different things that upregulate INOS and everything like that. What about specifically with methylene blue, is it just that it somehow decreases this upregulated INOS? What's the mechanism of action or physiology, if it's known?
I don't think it's known.
Okay. All right.
I
Well,
don't, yeah,
there's a lot of things that aren't known that work, you know.
yeah.
So
But
that's
also, I mean, there's still that big, you know, controversy on whether an upregulated INOS under these inflammatory conditions is actually producing more nitric oxide or superoxide.
so
So, you know, like when you read all these papers and stuff, and they talk about peroxynitrite and how damaging peroxynitrite is.
okay.
Okay. Well, peroxynitrite is ONOO minus.
All right.
Okay. Nitrate is NO3 minus.
Okay.
So when you read these papers and they talk about peroxynitrite, because peroxynitrite is a molecule that's made when superoxide and nitric oxide come in close contact with each other.
Okay.
And you read all these papers that talk about peroxynitrite and the damage that is done. Actually, they can't measure that peroxynitrite. They are not measuring it because it hangs around even less than nitric oxide. They are measuring nitrotyrosine, and they are assuming that it was nitric oxide that made the nitrotyrosine.
All right.
However, there's other molecules that can make nitrotyrosine, and it's not just nitric oxide. And in fact, there are studies showing that 90 to 95% of the peroxynitrite isomerizes, because that's ONOO to NO3, it isomerizes to nitrate, which is inert.
Okay.
So the nitric oxide is actually scavenging that superoxide.
Okay.
So is that damage from upregulated INOS from nitric oxide, or is it from the superoxide?
Right. And so they're only able to measure the peroxy. What was it? Peroxy?
They don't measure it.
No, but they have to measure it by proxy with the other molecule.
Yeah, with the nitrotyrosine, and they're just, it's all based on assumptions.
Right. Right. It's well, there's other situations where, you know, you measure things by proxy because there's just not the ability to necessarily find that particular biomarker. And
but then these assumptions are, you know,
right.
repeated and repeated and repeated, but they might not necessarily be true.
Yeah, but isn't it true that if you repeat it enough, no matter how false it is, it becomes true? You know, I mean, look at natural immunity. It went away for a while. So yeah. So all right. So let's talk about the person who comes into our office. They've got bad peripheral neuropathy. We know that their nerves are stressed. We've talked about this upregulation of INOS and a down regulation of the
ENOS and
NOS. And so we want to put them obviously on a nitric oxide supplementation as well as methylene blue. What's the combo? What's the secret sauce here? I mean, low dose, of course, but.
Well, just make sure your nitric oxide is optimized first, and you can do that with the strips.
All right.
Either through supplementation or you can do it through your diet.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, you just have to be real cognizant of what you're doing.
Right.
Because the DASH diet, you know, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension.
Right.
You know, it has 12 to 1,500 milligrams of nitrate per day. You know, and it's used as a drug, you know, as a therapy.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you to interject a little bit about some of the things that decrease nitric oxide production. I mean, because people don't think about it, you know, like obviously you make more nitric oxide if you breathe through your nose than your mouth. And that's so easy to take care of. Just tape your mouth shut, especially at night. And And then, it's been shown in the literature how very high levels of mouthwash are very detrimental to the oral microbiome. So you don't get that conversion of the nitrate to nitrate to nitrite.
Right.
That's impaired.
Age.
Right.
By the time we're 40, our ability to make nitric oxide through that NOS enzyme decreases to about 50%. By the time we're 60, it's only about 15%. Our diets, we talked about that.
Right.
Medications.
We talked about
right. Yeah, antifungals, antidepressants, birth control pills, NSAIDs, PPIs, EMF, and we're swimming in the sea of EMF. Pesticides, glyphosate.
Right.
And it's glyphosates everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay. Any kind of oxidative stress. Genetic SNPs. If you have any MTHFR SNPs, which 40% of us do.
Now, is that because of the upregulation of homocysteine then? Or...
No, it's because you're not being able to make your BH4, your tetrahydrobiopterin.
Okay.
Your BH4 is what keeps that NOS coupled.
Very, very interesting. So we'll start.
Stress. And the big one, stress.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Stress increases oxidative stress. Oxidative stress uncouples NOS. So think about it. When you're stressed, you get sick easier.
Right.
Okay. Yep. Which means your iNOS is not working correctly. When you're stressed, you have more cardiovascular disease, more hypertension, more strokes. That's because that eNOS is uncoupled. So stress is pretty detrimental to our production of nitric oxide. And look at these last few years, how much stress we've been under.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you combine all of the environmental things that are going against you, all right, I want nice fresh breath, so I'm going to just destroy my oral microbiome with whatever it is that I'm flushing my mouth out with. Even some toothpastes, right? Fluoride.
Yeah, fluoride, right. The whitening toothpaste, the hydrogen peroxide.
Right.
But the beautiful thing about nitrate supplementation or increasing your nitrate in your diet is with continued use, nitrate helps rebuild your microbiomes everywhere, from your gut, your oral, your skin, everywhere, helping rebuild those microbiomes.
What about, the organic? I have been told, I don't know if this is true or not, that organic vegetables many times won't have a high enough level of nitrates, because if you use nitrates, now you can't deem yourself organic. Is that true?
That's true.
Wow. So we're thinking we're maybe better off. We may be better off because we're not getting glyphosate, but at the same time, or we're getting less glyphosate. But at the same time, we're not getting what we think we're going to get.
Yeah, because the soils are so depleted.
Yeah. Well, that could go into a whole different discussion about regenerative farming versus non-regenerative farming. I mean, there's a lot that I think we're getting charged more for that are really less. And nitrates, I think, would fall into that category. You mentioned gut microbiome. I had read that nitric oxide does improve the gut microbiome. I forgot why.
It's the nitrate.
Okay.
Because the nitrate is actually a prebiotic.
Gotcha.
So it's food for these. It actually supports the growth in the colonies of the good bacteria. And all of your microbiomes are connected. So you improve the gut, you improve the mouth, which will improve the skin, improve the urinary tract.
Very interesting.
The brain, like we've got these different microbiomes everywhere, and they're all connected.
It's kind of interesting. I don't think anybody even talked about a microbiome 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of the new in thing.
Yeah. Very good. So I guess to kind of wrap it up, sum it up, it's okay to take the low-dose methylene blue at the same time as your nitric oxide supplement. And so just take this book that was written by this non-researcher of nitric oxide or poor researcher, whatever we want to call it. I mean, I don't mean to throw rocks at anybody, but sometimes these things get, put out there, and then it really destroys the patient's understanding or even their implementation of things.
Right. And both, supporting that nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide pathway with the methylene blue is really helpful for any kind of cognitive dysfunction. Because in cognitive dysfunction, you see decreased blood flow.
Right.
You see decreased supply of the oxygen, the glucose, and the nutrients going to these brain cells. You see decreased cytochrome oxidase activity, decreased energy production. But both of these help recouple that electron transport chain, so you're not making so many reactive oxygen species. You're not being under so much oxidative stress. And you're recoupling that, meaning that, the electrons are going down to make your ATP.
Gotcha. What's your thoughts on administrative forms of methylene blue? Because you can get it sublingually, and
it's absorbed very, very well. Whether you do sublingual through the gut,
right?
It's absorbed very well.
The problem with
sure that you're doing pharmaceutical grade.
Yeah, don't get the fish tank cleaner.
Yeah, or even just the USP. Get pharmaceutical grade.
Right. And I think the biggest detriment of the sublingual or the buccal administration is that you have this Smurf looking mouth whenever you your tongue turns purple, and people go, wow, did the aliens get inside you or what happened? But it's kind of a weird thing. But I have noticed, and I don't think this is fair to say that it's just because of the methylene blue, because some of the sublingual methylene blue products are actually mixed with a touch of nicotine, which is kind of an interesting combination too. And that's another subject for another day. But it's kind of interesting because you can feel that little surge of energy, and that may be all due to the nicotine. I don't know, but
no, I can feel like it's not like a speed, or it's not like caffeine or anything, but it just, you feel a little more energetic because that electron transport chain is able to make your ATP better.
Right. And if you think of it from a neurocognitive standpoint, what we're trying to do is take tissue that is maybe a little bit hypoxic, or maybe in some cases a lot hypoxic, and we're trying to deliver more energy to those cells so that they can function and repair themselves and develop more synaptic connections and all of these things that are going on. I mean, look at transcranial magnetic stimulation. That's the whole premise of it, is I'm going to take this magnetic energy and I'm going to pump it through the skin and the skull into the cortex, and that's going to change into an electrical energy, and the electrical energy is going to create hopefully better, metabolism and all of these good downside things from that. So it makes a lot of sense.
Well, these neurons can't store ATP, can't store any, glucose or oxygen and things. So they always need to be fed.
So you're saying that the mitochondria don't store a lot of ATP or any ATP in the neurons?
The neurons don't store it.
That's very interesting. So it's 100% on demand.
So it just needs to be fed. And so that's why that microcirculation needs to be, healthy.
Right. In
order to feed these neurons.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. Any other parting advice for the co-administration of methylene blue and nitric oxide? I think the big thing for me is that it's okay low dose. And,
it's okay low dose.
All right. So anybody listening to this?
It's an electron donor and acceptor. It's a redox molecule. So that's really important to know, because it's not just, an electron donor. It's a donor and acceptor.
Interesting. Well, I think that if nothing else gets obtained by the listener, then it's okay to take your low dose emphasize the word low dose, methylene blue in combination with your nitric oxide supplementation. It's just fine. So appreciate that. Beth, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate you and your expertise and really how you're able to explain it, because a lot of people that are in your level of understanding and expertise are unable to convey the message. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Several years ago, I chose Alpinion as my ultrasound brand of choice after years of experience and research into ultrasound imaging. In fact, I have 2 of their machines. Alpinion has incredible precision and penetration built into their technology that, in my opinion, is simply the best value in all of the ultrasound imaging space. They have several price points to meet your needs, and I can tell you definitively that you'll end up having to pay double to achieve the equivalent imaging quality from other top brands. That doesn't even account for the unlimited software updates and remote tech support included with no monthly fees. Right now, to show their appreciation for the listeners of the Pod of Inquiry, they're offering an incredible discount. Their portable i7 retails for $21,000. But you can get it discounted at most medical meetings for $19,000. But my listeners will get it discounted to $15,900. This has never been offered anywhere for the new portable system with the engine of a console system. Use code SBPOI to take advantage of this incredible offer. You won't be disappointed with Alpinion. I sure haven't been.
We hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes, found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If this incredible and educational conversation has tickled just a little bit of your cortex, please leave us a review and spread the message to your friends and colleagues. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show, if used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.